All right, we'll get going. 1 Chronicles chapter number 12. Our time together in these weekends, and I didn't used to do all the teaching on Saturday, and I don't necessarily think I will all the time in the future, but it's been that way the last few years where I've done most of the teaching during the day on Saturday, simply because these are times I don't get to see you guys except here on a normal basis. Several of you said, you watch the television or you see me all the time. And one of the brothers was telling me this morning that he gave a set of some of the school tapes to one of his relatives, and they were watching them and they were beginning to learn some things and enjoy it. And he said, but this guy's he's kind of quirky. He said he's talking about, when you're teaching, you don't want to make it about you. But he said he had on this funny-looking coat and an odd-looking tie and a different-looking shirt, and it was hard not to make it, not to kind of stick out in the crowd. And he said, well, a guy had to die for him to have that coat, so that's, I understand, but yeah, that's true. So what I say back to people like that is you have to remember what I was looking at when I was looking out that way in 1985, what you were wearing. Do you remember what you were wearing in 1985? Just because you got a video of me wearing what I was wearing in 1985 doesn't mean I can't remember what you were wearing in 1985. I remember leisure suits and you dudes thinking you look so hot in them and that kind of stuff. But, my purpose, I don't get to see you and get together with you too often. We have conferences and things like that. But this is a weekend. This isn't a normal kind of a Bible conference where we're going to bring you here to try to teach how to preach. We got stuff in the school to do that, or try to teach how to rightly divide the word. We do that all year long. My purpose in this weekend, frankly, is just a couple of things. One is to try to be a little refreshing for you. I know what it's like in the ministry, day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out, and it's like trying to push a rock up a hill sometime, it seems. And there's the adversary has a definite program in the spiritual battle in the dispensation of grace, and that one of his tactics is to attack you personally. One is to attack the message, then he attacks the messenger. And discouragement is a real factor. Talks about the Antichrist in Daniel 7, said he wears out the saints. Often Paul will say, be not weary. And what Spurgeon called the preacher's fainting fits. And that's something, we all go through. And if there's anything I desire for you this weekend, it's just to have an opportunity to sit around. And it's not so much that misery loves company, is that there's comfort one another, in these things. And you get a chance to kind of be around other people that do appreciate you and that aren't mad at you and that aren't trying to stick a shiv in your back and that kind of thing. And that don't have double motives and things you can just kind of relax with. And that's refreshing, and I hope it is that for you. The other thing is that there are things in ministry that you just need to be aware of. And as time goes on, over time, I think all year long, I think about, I'll see something going on, I'll watch something in the culture, or see something in the Scripture, and I'll think, boy, that's something that the guys need to be aware of. And this is just sort of an updating kind of a thing about ministry things. So this is for me, it's more of a ministry type weekend where we're talking about things that are important with regard to the work of the ministry that we're engaged in together. And I know that throughout the years, it's been a constant push of mine to try to get people to do the work of the ministry. Let's get on with the program. And Brother Keith Baxter's buddy, he's real popular now. He says, "Get her done," and that's an old Southern expression that you can't use anymore because of Larry, but in the context he put it into. But the idea is let's get on with the program. And as you do that, you begin to get out and things, and you begin to see how things are going, and it's important to be aware of what's happening and to be forward looking. And that's really what I want to talk to you about this year. 10 years ago, back in 1997, I talked to you about some of these things, and probably just some of you were there. And as I was preparing for this, I'm thinking, well, you already, we did it 10 years ago. You know all of that. And then my wife said, what? Because my wife's always either in the kitchen or the nursery. She's heard everything I got to say anyway. And I realize that maybe some of you, well, don't realize many of you weren't here 10 years ago. So I'm going to go over some of these things that kind of give you an idea of the culture and the world that we live in. And the idea is to try to help you to focus forward, not backwards. One of the reasons that even people who understand things in the Scripture often are irrelevant to the world they live in is they don't have any idea about what's going on around them. And the people they get their information from are looking backwards instead of forward. 1 Chronicles chapter 12, verse 32, it's just one little group of people. Somebody asked me, what is that title, the Issachar factor? It's this: the children of Issachar, which were men that had understanding of the times, to know what Israel ought to do. These men in Israel were equipped to understand the times. They understood where they were in the cycle of what's going on in God's people, in the nation Israel. And they understood it so they could know what Israel ought to do. They had an ability to know how to do the work of the ministry, how to carry on things. One of the great challenges in the ministry is to do just what these guys did: understand the times so you can know what you and I ought to do. Now, in the prophetic program, Israel worked on a time schedule. And part of what's going on there is the time schedule in Leviticus 26 about the courses of judgment, and they knew where they were when it was the first course, second course, third course, fourth course. They knew exactly where they were in the program of God, and they could identify it, and they knew how to identify it. Israel has a time schedule, Daniel chapter 9. You know, the 70 weeks of Daniel 9 and so forth. The various sevens, the 49s and the 490-year thing. There are all these cycles in Israel's history that are prophetic, where God was intervening in the nation, directing the activity of the nation, and going forward. Now, in the dispensation of grace, God's interrupted all of that. You understand that. And we're not living on the prophetic time schedule, so going back in Israel's program and trying to identify that isn't going to help you any. Romans chapter number 11. By the way, I've got a terrible cold. Of all the times in the world to get a cold, this is a great week to do it. My wife got up yesterday morning she was sick. This morning she's sick, and she's standing in the shower this morning fussing. I said, who are you fussing at, the water fountain or what? She hadn't had a cold in 2 years. Why do I have to have it this morning and this week and stuff? Well, you're just trying to share the blessing, I guess. I'm not sure. But I'm going to do the best I can, try to make my voice last all day. I'm not going to probably be talking as quickly and rapidly as I would like to be, but I'll hold out long as I can, and if I get where I get in a coffin jack or something, we'll just take a break and work it out. It's just us, and there's nobody looking over our shoulder to tell us what we got to do or what we can't do. The only thing you have to do is at 10 o'clock go drink some Baptist beer. I can't help but call it Baptist beer. I'm sorry. That's a southern expression, but I'm talking about coffee. And if you want the elixir of the gods, we've got some Dr. Pepper. Excuse me. Romans 11, verse 11, Paul says, I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? God forbid, but rather through their fall, salvation has come to the Gentiles to provoke them to jealousy. It's important to understand that God has set aside the nation Israel, and when he did, he set aside their program. So that prophetic calendar that Israel worked on isn't functioning and working today. Paul says in verse 13, "For I speak to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am the apostle of the Gentiles, I magnify my office." Paul is the apostle to the Gentiles. He's the apostle to the nations. God isn't dealing through the nation Israel anymore. He's now dealing with all the nations of the earth, and he's dealing with them through the ministry that he gives to us through the apostle Paul. You and I are ambassadors for the Lord Jesus Christ. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, our ambassadorship is carried on in light of the dispensational change that God has for us today. In 2 Corinthians 5, are you still in Romans 11? Hold on to that. Hold on to Romans 2 Corinthians. Look back at Romans 11, just so you understand how you jump from Romans 11 to 2 Corinthians 5. Romans 11, verse 13, "For I speak to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am the apostle of the Gentiles, I magnify my office, if by any means I may provoke to emulation them which are my flesh, and might save some of them." Today, the only way anybody gets saved is acting like a bunch of lost, cut-off Gentiles. You don't act like Israel to get saved today. That means it doesn't help you to be a Messianic Jew, and it doesn't help you to be in a denomination that thinks it's Israel. All that stuff that Christendom's doing out there today. Verse 15, "For if the casting away of them be the reconciling of the world, what shall the receiving of them be but life from the dead?" God isn't through with Israel. He'll finish that program, but right now he's cast them away, and that's resulted in the reconciling of the world. Now, if you come to 2 Corinthians 5, you'll see what the reconciling of the world, that's a dispensational issue. That doesn't mean all the world's saved out there. It just means that God has broken down the middle wall of partition between Jew and Gentile, and he's made the ground level today. We sing that marvelous song that the ground is level at the foot of the cross. No man stands higher than I. That's only true today in the dispensation of grace. There's no difference, all have sinned. There's no difference, whosoever calls on the name of the Lord can be saved. Now that's today, that dispensational reconciliation. 2 Corinthians 5, start in verse 16. "Wherefore, henceforth know we no man after the flesh. Yea, though we have known Christ after the flesh, yet now henceforth know we him no more. Therefore, if any man be in Christ, he's a new creature. Old things are passed away. The old program's all gone. Behold, all things are become new, and all things are of God." I love that. All things are new, and all those things that are new are of God. Who of God is made unto us wisdom, righteousness, sanctification, and redemption. Everything is what God's doing today. "Who hath reconciled us to himself by Jesus Christ, and hath given to us the ministry of reconciliation, to wit, that God was in Christ reconciling the world unto himself, not imputing their trespasses unto them, and hath committed unto us the word of reconciliation. Now then, we are ambassadors for Christ." Our ministry today is to take that ministry of reconciliation and take it out, and it's his representatives to the world today, to all nations without any distinction, and to make that known. Now, if that's our ministry today, to go out to the nations, to the world, and offer the gospel of the grace of God, then it just as the sons of Issachar needed to understand what God was doing with Israel and how the life and the cycle of Israel was working, it just strikes me that we need to understand how the nations operate. If I'm to be an ambassador to the nations, then I need to know something about, at least it seems to me it would help me to know something about, how the nations are designed to operate today. If you look back in Romans chapter 13, verse number 11, Paul says, "And that knowing the time, that now it is high time to awake out of sleep." How would you know the time? Well, he just explained it to them back in chapter 11, 12, 9, 10, and 11, rather. Romans chapter 9, 10, and 11 is a whole dispensational section in the book of Romans to explain you're not Israel. Israel's program's been interrupted. It's been set aside, and God's doing something new today. He's crafting a new vessel of honor today out of people that were really vessels of dishonor. And he's got this new ministry today in the forming the body of Christ. He's not through with Israel. He'll finish that. He's just interrupted it. So the time now is in this interruption, and we know that from reading Paul's epistles and from studying Paul's epistles. And Paul expects us to understand that and to be aware of it and to be awake because of it. You know, back in chapter 11, verse 25, he says that he would not have you to be ignorant of this mystery. Paul understood that the dispensational change was something that you needed to be intelligized about because people were going to make mistakes about it. And that's why you have 3 chapters in this foundational book of Romans all about that to clarify that confusion so you don't get confused about it. And so that you can know where you stand in the ministry as you carry it out. When Paul says, preach the word, be instant, what? In season and out of season. No matter what's going on out there. Well, wouldn't it be good to know when it's in season and when it's out of season? You know, you go out and you do the work of the ministry, and you struggle and you get nowhere. That's called out of season. Then you go over here and you do the same thing and you get results. That's called in season. Now, when you're getting results and things are happening and people are coming, what do you think? First thing you think is you're doing something right. When you're not getting any results, first thing you think is you're doing what? Something wrong. The key is, what he's saying there is do the same thing all the time. Understand sometime it's going to be seed time. Sometime it's going to be harvest. And in the seed time, you don't get mad because you aren't harvesting. You know you're planting the seed to get the harvest. And in the harvest, you're not getting proud because you're just getting all this harvest and nobody, that little guy over there, he's planting the seed because you wouldn't have got the harvest if the seed hadn't been planted. And you have to keep that in your mind as you're preaching the word. In 2 Timothy, he's talking about there's going to be a time when people don't want this stuff. Okay, what do? You stick by it. You don't change the doctrine to suit the times. You just keep teaching the truth. And if it means you have to do it in a different way, you know, maybe it didn't highly acclaimed and readily accepted, so you have to maybe pay the bills yourself. Pay the bills in time and finance or whatever. Okay, I'll do it when it isn't in favor. I'll do it when it is, because my job is to be the ambassador to get the word out. So it helps if you understand that principle, but it also helps if you understand the season that you're in. That's what I'm trying to get at. And there's information in the Scripture. Go with me back to Acts chapter 26. Stop in Romans 1 as you go. Romans 1 verse 5, when Paul describes his ministry, talking about the resurrected Christ, Romans 1:5, by whom we have received grace and apostleship. The Apostle Paul is the only apostle that got his apostleship from Christ in heaven. For obedience of the faith, that's the doctrine that Paul's going to commit to you, among all nations. Paul has an every man, all nation ministry. That's different than what was there before him. Okay? Come with me to Acts chapter 16. It's fascinating in that regard that we need to understand how the nations operate or how they're designed to operate in order that we can understand something about our ministry in and among and to the nations. And one of the most fascinating things for me through the years has been to discover how God's Word identifies the national life is to be functioning, and then to be able to see in the world that I live in that what season of life we're in, and therefore to know how to address the ministry toward it. It's going to be the same ministry, but addressing it to the culture where the world is that I live in. Acts chapter 17, Paul's on Mars Hill. You know the account. Verse 24, God that made the world and all things therein, seeing that he is Lord of heaven and earth, dwelleth not in temples made with hands, neither is worshipped with men's hands, as though he need anything, seeing he giveth to all life and breath and all things, and hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on all the face of the earth. God out of one blood, out of Adam and Eve, made all the nations that dwell on the face of the earth, and hath determined the times before appointed. Notice there are some times in relationship to the nations. and the bounds of their habitation. Now, why did he do that? He does that in Genesis. We're going to look at that in a minute. That they should seek the Lord, if haply they might feel after him and find him, though he be not far from every one of us. God set up the way the nations are going to function so that there would be a capacity among the nations to feel after the Lord. It's like a feel after the Lord. It's like a blind guy trying to find his way around in a. If you're blind, you don't care if the light's on or not, do you? You can't see. And you're feeling, they're blinded, and they're trying to feel after him. So to enhance the capacity and the ability for them to find him as they feel after him and grope around, you see there's going to be an enhancement of the capacity for evangelism in understanding these things. God set up the way nations function so that in their divisiveness there is a protection and an enhancement that's going to enhance my ministry, your ministry, as we go out and try to proclaim the gospel of the grace of God to them. But if I don't understand what's going on, then I hinder myself from understanding what's happening. In Ephesians chapter 2, when he talks about we walked according to the course of this world, there is a system of operating in the world system that goes all the way back to the book of Genesis about the principles of how nations are designed to operate. Go back with me to Genesis. In the school, we go through the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis because of this. My whole purpose in going through those things with you is you cover 2,000 years of human history in 11 chapters in Genesis 1 to 11. And the reason for that is that there are those institutions that God establishes for the functioning of man in the earth. The first one is volition, then there's marriage, then there's the family, and then because of the demonstration that he gives in the first 7 chapters of the book of Genesis that those 3 institutions are in need of something else beyond the family organization, in chapter 8, 9, 10, and 11, you have the institution of nationalism. Now, those are my terms for it. You can call it what you want to, but the fact is that mankind as he lives in the earth is going to organize himself. First, you'll be in marriages, and then families, and families organize themselves into tribes. But what happens is that before long, the tribes will begin to associate with others, and as soon as that starts, as soon as you start getting that kind of an organization going out there and relationship, you have to have what we call politics. It's part of the natural function of the way life operates. And unless you have some structure under which you can operate in that kind of a thing. See, in a family, if you've got a dad, you've got a mom, you've got kids, you've got a power structure, and it's there. And then when the kids separate over here, you've got a dad and here's a dad and here's his son, but now his son's a dad, so he's not under his dad anymore. He stands there, and they're on an equal basis as far as they have their family structure and so forth. But they work together up here because of the family relationship. Or maybe they don't work together because of the family relationship. Now, there's some dynamics there. But as soon as you begin to go outside of the clan and the relation, and all of those things, that's what we call, people are going to organize themselves into political units. It's the way life works. Now, what you learn in the first 6, 7 chapters of Genesis is that once you get organization beyond the family, if you don't have some kind of structure out there for that, it's going to all degenerate. And that's what you see in the first 6 chapters of Genesis. The earth without nationalism just went kapooey. There was nowhere to get protection. There was no way to put limits on the spread of evil. In Genesis 1 to 3, you see the origin of man, the purpose of man in the earth, the fall of man. Chapter 4, 5, and 6, you see this representative picture. In chapter 4, you see the picture of society before the flood. Cain and Abel with the way of Cain, the performance-based acceptance program of rebellion against God. He builds a city. Every city in the Bible, when they built them like that, listen, where did Cain get the idea of building a city? He got it from God. God built the first city. God's intention was to bring that city down. God lived in a city, bring it down on the earth. And he told Cain, you can't live. He loved the ground. He was a farmer. He wanted to live here. And he says, you're going to be a vagabond. You're going to have no certain dwelling place. Go out and just wander in the earth. And Cain, when he went out, he didn't do that. What did he do? He built a city, named it after his own boy. Monument to himself. But he built it in rebellion to God. And the spirit of the city, from the first city in Genesis 4 until God brings his city down in Revelation 21, the spirit of a city is the spirit of rebellion against God. We studied that. There's a tremendous doctrine about the city all through the Bible. Listen, 53% of the population of our nation lives in the 50 largest metropolitan areas in the country. And for some of you, it says, I'm running to the woods. But if you've got a ministry heart, where do you want to minister? You want to minister to squirrels and raccoons, or you want to minister to people? You got to go where the people be. And they're going to get, they're moving to the metropolitan. By the end of the next decade, it's like 60% of the world are going to live in major metropolitan areas. Now, what does the Bible say about living in cities? Folks, the Bible says the first city was built in rebellion against God. It was man's idea to do different things. And cities are places where the live program congregates. But listen, if you don't take the truth to those cities, the Apostle Paul in his ministry, he targeted cities. He targeted population centers. He didn't go into a town to run to the woods. He went into an area and focused on the major metropolitan areas because that's where the people were. If the people are there, that's where the problems are. And if truth isn't there, they're going to solve the problems with error. But if truth can be there in the mix, you can have some opportunity to put some truth in there. I know when we moved to Chicago, I thought, my goodness. I'm on the radio here in Chicago. One radio station covers the whole metropolitan area. 9.5 million people that one radio station covers. I came from the state of Alabama. There's 4.3 million people in the state of Alabama. There's twice as many people in this metropolitan area than there is in the whole state of Alabama. You'd have to have 30 radio stations to cover Alabama. We can cover the one right here. I know everybody doesn't listen to it. Our radio station on Sunday morning had an Arbitron study 4 or 5 years ago, and there's 60+ thousand people listen to it every Sunday morning. How'd you like to preach to 60,000 people every week? I like it. And I'm willing, and I pay to do it. You know, that's a lot of people. And you say, glory to God, hallelujah. And I look at it like this is the biggest fishing hole I ever saw until I went to New York. And that's like 5 Chicagos. And I said, wow, I'm glad I didn't see this when I was 20. Because I wouldn't have been 32 and went home, told my wife, pack up, we're moving to Chicago. I'd have said, hey, chick, we're moving. Well, anyway. The idea is, but if you can understand some things about how these things operate, well, you go down through Genesis 4, and he tells you, because he builds the city. Then you see the development of culture. The development of the systems that are designed to get around the curse that God placed on Adam. The city, the culture that he develops there, verse 18, 19, 20, 21, the agriculture, the economic, social, political structure that he develops there, the verse 21, the arts, the music and the arts. You've got enough leisure time to go out and do that kind of thing. Metallurgy, verse 22, industrialization, and right on down through it to weapons of mass destruction. All that development of culture and society, very much like where we live today, but it's all developed for the purpose of getting around what God told him to do. So immediately you begin to understand that the course of this world isn't designed, it isn't being used to propagate truth. It's been subverted to propagate error. In chapter number 8, after the flood, Noah gets off the ark. And in 8, 9, 10, and 11, in the New World Order, chapter 9, verse 1, God blessed Noah and his sons and said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Isn't that what he told Adam? So he says, okay, we're going to recalculate things here. We're going to start over. In essence, he doesn't literally start over because he doesn't make a new man. You know, when he had the angels and the angels sinned, he didn't come and make a redeemer for angels. He started over. He took some dirt and made a man. A brand new creature the universe had never seen. And it's sort of like, Brother Alex says, it's like he threw dirt in the devil's face. And he makes this creature that's a little lower than the angels. And he says, I'm going to take that creature and beat you with it and win back my stuff with it and accomplish my purpose with it. And the angels look and say, are you nuts? And God says, no, I'm not nuts, I'm wise. Because I know it's not just might and strength. Because if that's what it is, hey, I created everything, I could get rid of you. But it's wisdom to operate the system. That's really where my genius is. So when he came up with Noah, he doesn't abandon the plan with man. He just resets it. And now he's going to give man, he gives man the same commission. Go out and do the same thing, but he's going to do it with a little different order of things. And what he does, if you go down to verse number 3, every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you, even as the green herb. Before have I given you all things, but flesh with life therein, thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall you not eat. And surely your blood of your lives will I require. At the hand of every beast will I require it. At the hand of man, at the hand of every man's brother will I require the life of man. Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God made he man. And you, be you fruitful and multiply, and bring forth abundantly in the earth, and multiply therein. And God said unto Noah and to his sons with him, spake unto Noah and to his sons with him, saying, and I, behold, I establish my covenant with you, and with your seed after you. So he reestablishes that covenant with man. And by the way, he gave that covenant a sign. Know what the sign was? You don't know what the sign was? The rainbow, the bow. Now, why would that be a sign of that covenant with Noah? That bow, you go over in Ezekiel chapter 1, the last couple of verses there, he sees that bow, the rainbow, that multicolored light. You see, the light that comes off the throne of God is not just a white light like that light shining down there. You see this white blade. Ezekiel says it's like a bow. It's light that's gone through the prism and been refracted, and all of its elements are there. And you see all the colors. You know who wore the original coat of many colors? God does. He dwells in that light. And he says, I'm going to take that light that reflects my glory and attach that to the covenant that I'm giving you to be the ruler and dominion in the earth. You're going to be the one, Noah, man, that executes my glory in the earth. And he put that bow with it. Adam, by the way, originally was covered with that. He had that coat of many colors, that light. Well, now it's attached to, you can't give it to Noah because Noah's a son of Adam. You know you're not created in the image of God, right? You were born in the image of Adam. Adam's created in the image of God. But Genesis 5 says all of his descendants were born in his image. That's a fallen image, an effaced image. And so Noah, being born in the image of Adam, but he attaches that glory to his covenant. And so God's going to accomplish his purpose in the earth. And when he does that, he sets up some instructions here. Verse 9 and 10, he gives you he's going to do it through Noah's seed. So he tells you in chapter 10, these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Noah's got 3 boys, my 3 sons. So you get verse 2, you get the sons of Japheth, and that runs down to verse 5. By these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their land, everyone after his tongue, after their family, in their nation. Then he starts with the sons of Ham. And they go down to verse number 20. These are the sons of Ham after their families, after their tongues, in their countries, and in their nations. Then verse 21, unto Shem, and he gives you the descendants of Shem. Verse 31, these are the sons of Shem, after their families, after their tongues, in their lands, after their nations. These are the families of the sons of Noah, after their generations, in their nations. And by these are the nations divided in the earth after the flood. Notice how he divides them up into families, tongues, and nations. And the nations is associated with the land and the country. So you have this threefold division. There's the family, there's the culture, and the value system that they share together. There's the language, the tongues. There's the language. Where does that come from? Chapter 11. You see, Genesis 10 is carried out in light of what happens in chapter 11 with the rebellion at the Tower of Babel. Because as soon as God established nationalism, where he's going to separate these nations apart and establish them in nations, Satan comes along with the counterattack of internationalism. We today call it globalism. Get rid of egalitarianism, get rid of all multiculturalism, call it what you want to, get rid of all the distinctions between them, say that they're all the same and they're all equal. That's what Nimrod did. And that's the one world, the one language, the one government, the one religion, and so forth. But in chapter 10, God says, no, we're going to divide. So after he judges the Tower of Babel and scatters them and divides them with the tongues division, now they're divided up, and he sets these and the boundaries that he sets between them is family, language, and national entity. We would say there's culture, there's language, and then there's national borders. So you have borders, language, and culture that make up what it is to have a national identity. And as you see these national, and by the way, to have a national entity provides, first of all, it provides identity. Then it provides, people are naturally loyal to what they're born into. You know, I've been around the world, and I've never been in a nation where the people in that nation didn't love their nation. You know this, that? You'll go to a country, and they'll talk to you, and you'll get this question over and over. Say, how do you like our country? You know? Because you're naturally loyal to what you're born into. And that's a fact of life. It's a fact of the way. It's that way because God organized the thing together that way and designed it to function that way. Now, as a national entity gives you identity, it also gives you protection. If you're in one nation and bad things start happening, people do what? They migrate to the next nation across over here because that border stops the oppression of the government over there or the stuff going on over there, and it gives a place to go get protection. But better than that, if I'm in my nation and something bad going on in that nation over here, my nation's government puts a barrier up here and says, you can't come over here and do that. So you're able to isolate yourself away from, but also isolate sin and have places where you can put it. That's what God did in the very beginning. In Genesis 1, when Satan rebelled, what did God do? He boxed up the rebellion. Put it in some confines so that it didn't just spread everywhere. He put a confinement around it. That's what he's doing in Genesis chapter 1. So he does that with national entities. Now, what I'm trying to get with you today, go back with me to Genesis 8, is that in the midst of doing that, he explains to you how he set the nations up and designed them to function so that as they function, you'll be able to understand what's happening with them. And this part of it is something that I think is it goes to what Paul's talking about over there about being the apostle of the nations and having ministered to the nations. Paul expects you, when you come to Romans chapter 1, and he says, Paul, a servant of Jesus Christ, separated into the gospel of God, he expects you to know who God is. You notice he doesn't explain to you who God is. You've been able to read Genesis to the book of Acts by the time you get to Romans, and you should already know who God is. Who is he? In the beginning, what did he do? Created. Well, okay, that's pretty clear. First verse in the Bible, fix that for me. Who is God? He's the creator of heaven and earth. So I know some things about who God... So a lot of times there are things in Paul's epistles that he expects you to know about. So when he starts talking about the nations, he expects you to understand what God has already revealed and explained. Or, you know, if you just got saved and start, like I did, and start reading the book of Romans, you know, Paul didn't... He understood that, you know, poor Richard's going to get saved. He never read anything, so he's going to start reading Romans. He didn't read Genesis yet. But sooner or later, you're going to read Genesis, and you're going to put the whole book together as a unit, and you're going to understand that when you come to Romans, there's a whole bunch of information over here to the left of it that can help you understand what the nations are. It has nothing to do with dispensational things. It just has to do with who the nations are. The dispensational things is why we minister to them and what we minister to them. But how God set them up, now that's what Genesis 1 to 11 is designed to teach you. And in chapter 8, he says, verse 20, Noah built an ark. Yeah, he built an ark too. Noah built an altar unto the Lord, and took of every clean beast and every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. That's why he didn't take the animals into the ark 2 by 2. He took some of them in 2 by 2, but he took some of them in 7 by 7. You remember that? Well, he's going to kill some of them. And if you only had 2, you know, my kids used to ask the joke, said, Daddy, why didn't Noah swat one of the mosquitoes on the ark? Well, it would have been a good idea, you know. Noah was talking to his boys fishing off the back of the ark, and he said, go easy on the worms, I only brought 2. Well, if you get... I know they're old, but I'm old. He sacrifices the animals that he brought for that purpose. And the Lord smelled a sweet savor, and the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, neither will I again smite any more everything living as I have done. While the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. Now you read that, and that's an interesting, that's sort of a throwaway verse, that last verse there. People say, man, okay, fine. And there's a thing over in Jeremiah where he talks about as long as the ordinances of heaven and earth exist, God's purpose and plan for Israel will be carried. To get rid of Israel, you got to get rid of the universe. To get rid of Israel, you got to get rid of the ordinances whereby God runs the world and the universe. Because Israel's purpose is associated with them. Book of Job talks about the ordinances of heaven, the ordinances of the earth. And I think about, well, what are the rules for the way the world operates and nations? Well, there's an interesting thing there. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest. That's springtime when you plant the seed. Harvest is the fall when you take it up. Cold and heat, there's winter and summer. Then it says summer and winter, day and night, shall not cease. In other words, as long as the cycles of life in the earth keep going. The earth is designed, and man in the earth is designed to live in that cyclical pattern of life. The way life is going to be experienced in the world that Noah's descendants are going to live in is that it's going to be seasonal. It's going to have cold and hot, summer and winter, seed time and harvest. You're going to live in a world that operates on cycles. And the cycles are filled with seasons, different kind of things going on. Now, there's a bunch of them there in the thing, but you can see how the basic fundamental thing works. There's going to be cold, and there's going to be heat. Now, we call cold what? Winter. We call heat what? Well, doesn't the verse call it that? Did I not read that? Yeah, I did. Summer and winter. Okay. Then there's seed time. We call that spring. Then there's harvest. We call that the fall. Now, these are opposites. Like that. So I know something about the way life is going to function in the new world. There are going to be cycles. I'm going to go from cold to winter, and from winter back to cold. So how do you go from cold to winter? Well, you can go, whoop. You can live in Chicago. It's 37 degrees Tuesday. It was 82 yesterday. That's sort of, like that. But, or you can not live in Chicago and do it a little different. The way you work it, and the way we do it, is we have some seasons. You go from cold to spring, from spring to summer, from summer to fall, and from fall back into cold. So now I've got a cycle that I'm going through. And he said, that's the way life in the new world is going to work. It's the way you're going to experience it, and it's the way you're going to live it. And so you're going to have a cycle. You're going to have the seasons. Now you'll notice in the verse, and I'll tell you, 10 years ago I didn't have an understanding of this. I think I got a little better grasp of it today when he says seed time and harvest, cold and heat. That's 4. Summer and winter, day and night. Well, there's summer and winter, and I got to think, why did he say cold and heat and then say summer and winter? I mean, why would he have to repeat those two when they're obviously the same? What he's telling you is that there's a fundamental basic cycle, but then there are going to be some other ones running inside of it. So it's not going to be just one cycle. There's going to be a basic fundamental cycle of life that will have some other cycles functioning along with it. Now, life functions that way in the world we live in. If you know, for example, if you study history, there are what are called 500-year cycles in history, where it takes 500 years for the cycle to function around. In 500 nations worked in what were called, there was a kind of a church state kind of thing. Then you moved into nation states around 1000, and then in the Age of Reason, around the middle of the Dark Age, around the end of the Dark Ages, Renaissance, you come into what's called the Age of Reason, where you're moving out of the feudal system and the little divided thing. And now you moved into the Industrial Revolution, and now we're moving into what? The Information Age. And these 500-year cycles kind of go like that. Then inside of that, there's 250-year cycles. And people see those things, and as they identify them, they don't necessarily know what they're all about, but they'll see it here. And but what happens when you begin to understand how the Scripture's talking about it, you begin to be able to put those things kind of together. Now, there's 2 things to get right here to start with. There are 3 ways to look at time. I taught this information down in Ridge Farm. You guys know Brother Morris Chestnut. You can take something very erudite and complicated and say it in $3.75 words, and Morris will give it back to you in common sense. he heard me, I was teaching about these three different, there's the chaotic, linear, and cyclical ways to view time. And Morris says, oh, that's really dots, lines, and circles. I said, oh, that's good. I'll keep that. And I made a mistake. I told you where I got it. But dots, lines, and circles. There's the view of time that is chaotic. It's the dot. It's the existential now. Time is viewed as only what's going on right now. Yesterday, out in the front lobby, somebody had left a glass with ice in it and a Dr. Pepper. It's sitting on the desk in front of where the welcome station is there. Debbie was there. And I said, whose is this? And she said, I don't know. Somebody left it there. It's a glass with ice, never been used, and Dr. Pepper. I'm standing there. It don't belong to anybody. It's got no tag on it that says it's mine. So what do you think I did? Well, I was looking for something to drink at the time, so I picked it up because it's not a place, I picked it up because it's not a good idea to have it out there like that. It wasn't supposed to be there. And I went in the other room, and I popped the top, put the in, and I drank it. A little while later, Brother Don came around and said, where's my Dr. Pepper? I left my glass out here. I left it there. Somebody got my glass. Hey. You snooze, you lose, bud. You left it there. Now, see, there's two different ways of thinking. Linear thinking says it's mine, and just because I left it sit there, it doesn't mean it's not mine. It's got a history to it. It got there because I put it there, I had it, and so it belongs to me. Dot thinking, chaotic thinking, is it's sitting there, nobody's got their hand on it, it's up for grabs. And now you know what happens if you leave Dr. Pepper sitting around. And Brother Rick comes up. But that's an illustration of the two. One, in dot thinking, in the idea of, and the reason they call it chaotic time, is that there's no path. There's no cause and effect. It's just there. And you can't hold anybody accountable. So there's really no way to have moral accountability in that kind of a culture. Now, there are cultures in our world, especially in third world cultures, that's the way their culture is based. And their whole moral concept is based upon that. We have a concept in the law that says possession is 9/10 of the law. You've heard that. That's that right there. And there's not a way to hold someone accountable, because when Don came looking for his Dr. Pepper, it was too late. He had left it. And I'd come along and claimed it because I was working on chaotic time. And that's where, for example, in politics, it's called nihilism. That's where nihilism comes from. That's where Buddha's nirvana comes from. It's this kind of detachment from time and space. Life's just a dot. Then there's linear thinking. Life isn't a dot. It's a series of dots that are going somewhere. That's how you make a line. And it's going somewhere. It's got a beginning and it's got an end. It's going somewhere. And I'm going from here to back there. Don't get in my way. We're on the way. And linear thinking, that's just the way most Gentiles think. We're going from here to there. We're going somewhere. Now, if that's true, with a definite start and a finish, with a cause and an effect, I get over there because I decided here and I did all these things to get there. Now I can have a moral accountability system. I can have a value system that I couldn't have up here. Now I can have private ownership of property. I can say, that thing was mine. Now, when Don came to get his Dr. Pepper, I knew it was his Dr. Pepper when he identified him. I didn't know whose it was before that. And since I had bought it originally, I figured I'd reclaim it. But I didn't sit it out there. And when he came in and was looking for my Dr. Pepper, I didn't say, no, it's not your Dr. Pepper. I bought that. Because he had taken claim of it and put it out. And there was a linear line of demonstrable ownership. Okay? Linear thinking is the way we generally think about that. That's the way you have history, by the way. You start here and you move out there. And that's the general way we think about life and history as things go. It's the way the Greeks thought about it, the way Greek philosophy, the Romans, church history is viewed that way. The Western world is built on linear thinking. But there's another kind of thinking, and that's circles. And the circle says, yeah, life is a line going from here to there, but that line doesn't go in a straight line. That line comes out here, and it hits an obstacle, and it turns, and it goes here a while, and hits an obstacle, and it turns, hits an obstacle, and it turns, and pretty soon it's right back where it started. So we've been here before. Now that's where you get reincarnation and the Eastern kind of thinking and so forth. That life is just this endless repetition, you know, and that cow over there used to be Grandma, and this bug over here used to be Uncle Joe, and that kind of stuff. I mean, you can get some worked up stuff going on this, but you also get a different. In the linear thinking, I'm here, I'm going there. We never been here before. We never been there before, but we're here and we're going there. In this thinking down here, you say, you know, we've been there before. We've been there before. We could learn some things here by looking when we were there previously. And so the cyclical thinking gives you some viewpoint about life on the linear. The other thing is that when you think about this, how many times have you ever heard anybody say, if the world keeps going like it's going, we're going to hell in a handbasket, the country's gone, the kids are gone, life's gone. You said that, hadn't you? You're saying it right now about the economic catastrophe going on. You're watching the government and the bankers steal your kids' future. And you're saying, whoa, wait a minute. We're going to be what? God only knows what. Have you ever noticed it never came through the way you thought it was? Because life doesn't go in a line. It goes, you go out here and then it bends. And before it hits that ultimate end of where this path would take you if you went to the end of it, the key is it doesn't get to the end. It bends. And it turns in to a circle. Are you following that? Come with me to the book of Ecclesiastes. This is what Solomon's talking about. And by the way, I've got a list here. Time-wise, I'm not going to go through them. But you can go through this kind of a thing with a lot of different things in spiritual life and so forth. I just want to talk about nationalism. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 9. The thing that hath been, it is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun. Is there anything whereof it may be said, see, this is new? It hath already been of old time, which was before us. There is no remembrance of former things, neither shall there be any remembrance of things that are to come with those that shall come after. The thing that's been done has already been done. Well, you can't get that on the line, because if it's been done here, it hadn't been done before, because we got to get over here and do the next one. On linear thinking, that verse won't work. The thing that's been done has already been done. That means we've gone around the circle and we've come back here and we're just retracing the same cycle. Ecclesiastes is talking about cyclical thinking. Now, when you look at this, ultimately you know this is where things are going. You can't just have dot, but you got to have dot. You got to think in the moment. Okay? When I walked up to that Dr. Pepper, I looked at it, and I saw that it was unattached. That's thinking in the moment. And I thought, well, I could enjoy that. Okay? So you think you do think that way, but then you need to add to that linear thinking, because you need to think, well, that ice didn't just jump into that glass because it knew Brother Rick was going to come out here and want some ice. Somebody had to go get the thing. And you know good and well that whoever did it probably didn't do it thinking about me. They did it thinking about themselves. So you begin to go dot, dot. You begin to see the linear. You think linear. And so as soon as you start thinking linear, this automatically brings you to this. And as you think linear, it leads you to this, because the line doesn't go here, there, in life. It always kind of bends around. And you say, well, now what is that? And then you go to Ezekiel, and he said, oh, wow, see, God already had it figured out for me and wrote it down so I can appreciate that. Come on to chapter 3. To everything there is a season, a time to every purpose under the sun. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck up that which is planted. And he goes right on down through the list of things there. Verse number 15. That which hath been is now, and that which is to be hath already been. And God requireth in the past. That's talking about the cycle. Life is designed to be lived, dots, lines, and circles. It's designed to be lived in a cyclical pattern, and the cycles are going to be divided. You wouldn't have the cycle if you didn't have the seasons. You understand? All you would have is a straight line if you didn't have any changes. And it's the seasons that bend the line and make the circle. So it's important to see the turnings from each one of these seasons into the next. And as I see the turnings from one season to the next, then I begin to understand the things that go on here. You know how to identify winter, don't you? When you know it's winter, don't you dress different than in the summer? One of the craziest things I ever saw, it still happens, I saw it happen just recently. When we first moved to Chicago, we were from Mobile, Alabama, which is as far in Alabama as you can go without getting in the Gulf of Mexico. And I wasn't equipped for the cold weather up here. It was kind of stunning to me. Ride up in a parking lot and see snow tall as I was. That was weird. And I remember the first winter, it got down below zero for, a week or two. When it gets down below zero, you've got dry cold. All the, the humidity's out of the air. And it's like a dry heat. It's not so bad. But when it goes up and hits 15 degrees, the humidity factor goes back into the air. And literally, it feels balmy if it's 15 to 20 degrees. Now, if you've been 0 to maybe 5 below for a couple of weeks or maybe 6 days, and then it hits 15 to 20, you feel like springtime's here. And I went to the post office one morning, and it's like 18 degrees, and this dude gets out of his car in a pair of shorts. He's got a heavy, big old Parker on, but he's got on shorts. And I'm thinking, somebody needs to tell this guy he's half cracked. I had on long johns and a ski pants, and it's still cold to me. But because you get that little balmy feeling, he had on. And I see that all. I watch for it. Now, I've watched for 30 years. As soon as it gets up, coming back up. Now, 3 months before, when it was 40 and it went down to 18, you'd have never gotten shorts. It's going down. But when it's been so cold and it comes up and you hit that little mark there, there's one about 15 and there's one up around 30 that just, you're coming out of it. Let's get out the clothes. In different seasons, you know how to dress appropriately, even if you do wear shorts when it gets to be 18. In the summertime, I wrote, somebody was teasing me about the cold and the heat, and I wrote him back and said, well, you come to Chicago this weekend, bring your summer clothes because it's going to be warm. Last weekend it wasn't. You know how to prepare. Well, each season has a characteristic to it. That's why winter, spring, summer, fall is important. Because just as differently as these seasons are in the climate that we live in, they're just that different in the life of people. Now, what makes the differences and why you can have these seasons is the people involved. What we call generations. Now, what drives this cycle? First question I'd have is, how long is this cycle going to be? And in the life of a nation, the answer turns out to be, logically, the life of a generation, of a person. Look with me at Psalm chapter number 90. How long does God say the life of a person would normally be? Everybody says 70, but that's not really the answer. Psalm 90, verse number 10. The days of our years are 70, and if by reason of strength they be 80 years. Well, 70 is 70, 80 is 80. And the idea there is that the average life cycle is going to be about 80 years. Now, you and I divide those years up into 0 to 20, 21 to, let's say, 40, 41 to 60, and then 60 to 80. We generally divide them up into those sections. Now, this is not rocket science, and it's not macro math here. We're just kind of generalizing. And the first, there we call that, what do you want to call it? Call it youth? That's youths. Call it youth. You're a child. In the Bible, there's no such thing as adolescence, by the way. Did you ever notice that? Adolescence is a psychological development of the Industrial Revolution. Really. And it's designed to isolate. Have you ever tried to talk to a teenager? Talk? Do they talk? Well, they talk to me. They just don't talk to you. Mine didn't talk to me. They talk to you. But that's an abnormal thing. You take a kid who becomes a teenager, 13 is an adolescence. You know, Mark Twain, he said, when a kid becomes 13, you put him in a rain barrel and nail the lid down, feed him through the knothole. When he turns 18, plug up the knothole. And that's the way most people think about, teenagers. It's the horrible. That's a totally artificial thing. In normal life, a teenager, a kid grows up through life, and when he's 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, he would learn with his parents to work. My grandchildren, my granddaughters are 7, and their mom and dad has these chores for them. Now, if you're a smart 7-year-old, the twin girls, and they have, one of their chores is that they have to, when the laundry's done, their clothes are put on the table, and they have to go get their clothes and hang them in their closets. So one of them goes and gets her clothes and hangs them in. The other goes and gets 3 of her shirts and hangs them up and takes the others and puts them back in the laundry room. She's figured out how not to do her work. So, it takes a little parental instruction. Go over here and get back. Now, you can guess which one it is, can't you? And you teach them to work. And you teach them to work with you. And then you take them to work. And the way life normally would be lived is that the parents would be the ones who had the influence over their children, and your children would learn to work, and they would learn values, and they'd learn ethics, and they'd learn life with their parents. And as they go up through the 12, 14, 16-year-old age group, have you ever noticed your children when they're 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, they want to go with their dad, they want to go with their mom, they want to bake the cake with mom, they want to cut the grass with dad. You even go to the store and buy them little lawnmowers when they're 6, to do that. When they're 15, try to get them to push a real one. But the reason they don't want to push the real one is, in the meantime, is because we've separated them away from that life. You do crazy things to kids. You separate them away so that the only peers they have are other dumb kids like them, other teenagers. I walked back here in the teen room back here 2 years ago, and a bunch of kids sitting back there, 15, 16, 14-year-old kids in the teen room back there. And I said, "What's going on?" They said, "We're bored." And I said, "Well, if I was you, I'd be bored too. What have they got to be interested in? They're only 15 years old. They hadn't done anything worth remembering, and they don't remember anything but about 2 years of their life yet. You know, when you're in that age, you come of age, you don't know. When you're 15, you don't remember what you did when you were 8. You hardly remember what you did when you were 12. Now, when you're 60, you hardly remember what you did yesterday. But they don't have any experience in life yet. Why wouldn't they be bored? To not be bored? I mean, if you sit around and think about yourself and you never did anything, sure, you're boring. Go get a life, and then you're not boring anymore. If you hadn't had a life yet, you ought to be bored because you're sitting around thinking about yourself. But you take those kids and you put them with parents, you put them with life, and the natural. But what we do is we isolate them. Have you ever wondered why a kid starts out going to school, wanting to learn, wanting to know, and by the time he gets out of grammar school, he hates it? And you want to give that system more money? And you think money's going to change that? It just makes it worse. That's why half the people in urban schools in America don't graduate. Somebody ought to, hey, doing the same thing over and over again, thinking you're going to get different results is one of the definitions of insanity. But it's more than just, see, people think, well, we'll go fix that symptom. You take a kid, you isolate him from where he ought to be getting his input, put him with people that don't have any input, and then you put the government in charge of educating him, and you wonder why things are nuts. Okay? I'm not mad about this. You have to think about what's happening in order to understand. So the Utes up there, you know what Utes are. You ever see the movie My Cousin Vinny? Never saw that? Oh, yeah, well. Okay, then you understand why a guy from Alabama can't understand somebody from Brooklyn. But in youth, you're growing up, and until you get about 20, we say you're going to be in adulthood. By the way, if you're a parent, someone asked me earlier about the age of accountability. There's not a specific age. It is the responsibility of the dad to know when your child comes of age. That's your job, mister. One of your responsibilities as a parent. Being a sperm donor wasn't the job. And when that child comes of age, he comes to its majority, the time appointed of the Father, Galatians says. It's your responsibility to know that child well enough to know when he comes of age, and to know him well enough to know when he's come to adulthood. And the rite of passage for your child into adulthood should come from you, not the culture. Okay? Now that's my lecture for your parenting. But God help you, folks. That's something, and that's lost on children. And they don't have it. Now, they get all kind of rites of passage. You get cars. Now you can drink booze. You can go vote. You can go join the Marine Corps. You can go have sex. You can do all this stuff. But that's not where the rites of passage should come from. But our culture divorces them from those things. But in Scripture, this guy is someone who is being brought to adulthood. So they're being brought to the place where they come of age. Now, when you get to be in your 20s, you're a young adult. You think you have arrived. You are there. And you're just nutty as you've always been, but you're just further along into it. Now, this is when you come of age. And for those of you who haven't been through that, it's coming. For those of us who have, we look back and say, yep, that's when I came of age. You thought you did when you were 15, 16, 17, but you didn't. You really didn't until your dad said you were. I tell people about one of my boys, he said, when I'm 18, I'm going to be a man. I said, boy, you'll be a man when I tell you you are. And with you, it's going to be a lot longer than 18. And it was. But there came a day when I sat down with him and said, I want you to know that I'm proud and honored to be able to say, you've arrived. That's a great, that is a rite of passage your children shouldn't be robbed of. To have their dad sit at the table and say, you've arrived. You're no longer under my you're now my equal at the table. The Bible is called adoption. But there's, just like there's that rite of passage between here and here, this is the next season of life. Now, when you get in midlife, which I've never understood why you call 40 to 60 midlife, except maybe 40 is double of 80, but 60 would be 120. If these are your midlife years, you're going to have to live to be over 100, so maybe we'll just say it's because you're 40. Midlife, and then 60 to 80 is eldership. Now, those four areas of life are the seasons of a human life cycle. In youth, you spend your time acquiring, learning, gaining, assimilating, taking on, receiving, and growing. But you're acquiring values. Hopefully you'll acquire them from your family. Very seldom in our culture does that happen. We passed laws 100 years ago to keep it from happening, by the way. You know a kid can't go to work at a paying job till he's 16 without the permission of the government? Did you know that? Child labor laws. People say, well, we got to keep them kids from working in the sweat factories. Well, the unintended consequences from that is that you isolated those children from the ability to work with their family and learn the value of money and how to handle money, how to make money. That work is how your time invested in work has a reward to it, and that reward means something. So mamas and dads just give the kids money or give them an allowance for just, the privilege of being their kid, and they don't learn to work. Can I tell you that most people that have a lot of money don't do it that way, by the way? You ever listen to Warren Buffett talk about that, the fact he hadn't given his kids any of his money? You ever listen to Bill Gates say he's not giving his kids any of his money? I saw Warren Buffett's granddaughter on Oprah one time, some years ago. I watch Oprah occasionally. She comes on at night here. And she said, my Dad didn't help me with my college tuition at all. And I'm thinking, what a stinking rotten rat, man. I'm helping my kids, and my wife's saving for our grandkids. And here's the richest man in the world, and not helping them? You say, what kind of selfish? No. You know what he did? He taught them that they ought to pay it themselves and help them make the money. But he passed laws and supports laws where you can't do that with your kids. That's called elitism. And you don't even know what happened. Now, I'm going to talk to you tomorrow about later on today about who did that to you, and you're going to be mad at me. In youth, you're acquiring, you're learning, you're growing. When you get in here, you're going to test the values that you've acquired. You're going to try them out. Is that really what I want to build my life on? Is that really how I want it to do? Midlife, You take them, you figured out what you want to do, and you apply the values. In eldership, you're going to remember and represent them. Each one of these has a different characteristic to it. It's a different season in your life. In youth, you're growing. In your young adulthood, you're vital and you're serving and you're working. In midlife, this is the power stroke of life, right here. That's the most important control era. You got to get that. This crowd right here, when they're in control, politically, economically, in the culture, these people are who run the culture. Okay? How that generation is formed, how it gets there, how it acquires, tests, and applies value. Here's the application side. That group right there is very important. And when that group is running the culture, and that is the group that's the power stroke. That's the power stroke of your life. You reach the pinnacle of your economic spending cycle at 46.5 years old, right in the middle of that. That's your power stroke. They lied to you and told you what they told me. They said, as soon as your kids get out of home, you start saving money for retirement, right? What bum advice that was. Kids get out of home, they start wanting money for the grandkids. But that's the power stroke there. And so what you find is that these seasons of life that your life goes through, that cycle is going to go through that period of time. And it's these seasons, when you pass from youth into young adulthood, and then when you pass from here into here, and when I'm 61, and I can sense in my life moving into this. The last 3 years has been fascinating. I sensed when I moved into this. And if you're older, you know what I'm talking about. Most of you are at least into this, and you know when you move from there to there. And you know there was a point in time, maybe it wasn't a day, but it was a season in your life where you knew that a crisis point came and you moved into it. Each of these seasons has that kind of a thing. And the key over here is to identify those points of transition in time, so that and then to know what season you're in and which one you're going into. Because the long and the short of it is, if you're in the summer, and you want to know what's going to happen as I enter into the winter, where should you look? Would you look back at what's been happening? Would you look back down the line and see what's been happening? What's winter going to be like? Well, let's see, 3 weeks ago it was hot. It's going to keep on being hot, right? No. Where would you look? The last winter. You'd say, wow, we're coming up out of summer, we're going into winter. Wonder what winter's like. Well, let me look at the last winter. Now, you know that instinctively, but in functioning in life, in the world, instead of saying, what's going on right now is going to be that. Why? Because this is going to produce that. That season coming, you don't look back at the last season, you go look at the last one of those seasons. And that's going to be the key to understanding how to grasp what goes on in the world that we live in. And it's time to quit. We're going to have to talk about that next time. But the seasons of life is what makes possible the creation of these generations that affect this. And it's the generations that cause the turning. It's what turns the line. Because youth don't go on as youth forever. They turn into young adults who turn into midlifers, who turn into old dudes. And with each turning, there's a whole different way of looking and dealing with life. Now, when you put that on a national level, because now that human lifespan is going to work out in the groups. And each one of these groups has a cohort, a bunch of people this age, then the bunch of people this age. And as you identify those things and you work that through the culture, then you know where you are and how things are happening. If you are in economics, you would know whether you should be selling potato chips or what. If you're in the ministry, well, you know what your message is going to be, but you'd understand which season you're in and how to present it that way. Okay, let's take a break. We're going to take. They have some coffee and break stuff for you. We'll be back in here about 10:30. You'll hear the music. Come back then, will you? Okay.